Hope for you, hope for your heart, hope for your life, hope for your well-being. Hope for you is changing lives, giving people hope for a better tomorrow. Hope is one of the things you need, for hope makes things possible. Hope brings life. If you felt overwhelmed, sad, lonely, and have suffered great loss, today we've come to bring you to the light of hope, encouragement, and a story that will give you hope for your situation. We welcome you to take a journey with us as Hope for You.
And so it wasn't real easy growing up. She would, a lot of kids, they'd be getting off the bus and they'd be doing their homework. And Mom, she drank for her pain, and so she would take us to my grandma's house or to bars, and we would, country bars, they would just let us sit in there while she drank, and she drank for her pain. She had a lot of traumatic things happen to her as a kid. She talked about 7 children living in a station wagon, and they had no money, and she would talk about picking up green apples for food and putting cardboard in her shoes because they were so poor. And so she had a rough start, and so we would go to these bars, and Grandma would tell her, if you don't bring me alcohol, then I don't ever want to see you again. So there was some control problems there. And so we're just little, probably first, second grade, and so every night instead of homework we're going to Grandma's house or the bars. And this one particular time we had went to visit my grandmother, and some of what I'm going to say, it might be hard for people to take. I was a little kid, and we walked in on how my grandma had hemorrhaged because she had drank herself to death. And so as like a 7-year-old, I was seeing my grandmother with blood everywhere. So that was like one of the first real tragedies. My mom would have car accidents about every year, and she would get put in a place to sober up and get her license taken away. And my dad would talk about buying her new cars all the time because she would wreck them. And my dad tells me when I was 1 year old, I should never have been able to walk, that I would just drag my leg around. So, and then I remember another car accident. We were hit really hard, like 55 miles an hour on the passenger side where I was sitting. And I was the only one in the car that didn't get hurt. And it hit my door. And Mom had broke all her ribs, and my sister was in ICU, and I'm the one that didn't get hurt. So that's the kind of life we were living. My dad had gotten saved when I was probably 10 or 11 years old. And my mom, she got saved, but she never got free of these addictions. She never got free of this depression or whatever was driving her to drink. And so there was a domestic, like a dispute, and the police were called. And so, there was no physical things that had happened there. It was just all arguing. And so the policeman that came on duty had told my dad to leave the house, and he ended up being the one that married my mother. So it's sort of like a soap opera, kind of like a story. So that's kind of like how some of my younger years went. And then when I was 15 years old, my mom was really, maybe 14, 15, my mom was really pulling on us to live with her. And so when you're a teenager, you think, yeah, I'm going to go live with Mom because I can do whatever I want to do.
So your parents got divorced?
When I was about 10 or 11 years old, that's right.
Okay. And then another man entered your mother's life.
This police officer that came out on the domestic dispute problem, he's the one that ended up getting a relationship with my mother and marrying her. Yeah.
So then your father remained single for a while.
My dad, it was a matter of, I'm thinking it was a couple years. He ended up getting remarried too, but he got married to a wonderful Christian lady, and yeah.
That's good. Mm-hmm. So then at 14 to 15 you went to go live with your...
Yeah, my mom was pulling on us. You know, when you're a kid, you love your mom and your dad, even if your mom has a lot of things going on, and dad had the stable home, you still love your mom. And you know, there was just this pull, and so my dad tells the story how he had laid the custody papers on the altar because he didn't want us to go live with her. But we were pulled so much that we went, and it was in another state, about 3.5 hours away from where my dad lived. And so we went to live with her.
That was a transformation.
Yeah, that was
That's a
totally
change.
different. Because we were in Christian school with my dad. My dad, for a few years there, we were in Christian school. We were in church at least 3 times a week. It was a pretty stable life. And then we ended up going into a totally different environment.
Which was very unstable, this environment.
Yeah, but see, the thing is, my stepdad, he would take us to church every Sunday. And he owned a Christian bookstore. And it appeared to be wonderful, but it wasn't so wonderful.
It was just an appearance.
It was an appearance. I mean, he would take us, when it was time to go enroll in school, he was that father person who would take us and enroll us in school and things of that nature. But behind the scenes, there was a lot of harm going on with my mom.
Yes. So that affects the household. Because if there's no peace, when you lack peace, you lack hope. See, peace and hope and love and faith and all of this intertwines together. So you went into an atmosphere to be with your mother. You're 15. You're entering into being a young woman. And being a young woman, it's amazing. It's an amazing journey in life. And so you're embarking upon a new journey in the connection of wanting to be with mother.
Yeah.
To embark upon this.
That's exactly right. And, you know, in that environment, it's just the way my mom was raised. And, you know, she would push cigarettes out to us and say, just go ahead and smoke them. She would just say, drink this and shut up, you know, and, yeah. So it was a totally different environment. But we were, you know, as kids, you think you can go do whatever you want to do.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah. But.
So there was a lot of abuse in the household.
Yeah.
You had mentioned before.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So it seemed like he had hid it from us kids. We were never harmed, but my mom, we were there about a 6-month period, and she had ran away from him at least 6 times. So about every month, we were packing everything we had in the car and going to live. We'd be in an apartment that had no furniture. We'd be living with an aunt, and I remember one time they put us out on like a screen porch, and I don't even know if we were sleeping on a bed. We would be in hotel rooms, and Mom was still drinking during all of these things. One time we lived in a mobile home. Sometimes they'd be furnished, and sometimes they were not furnished. And one particular time, it wasn't furnished. We were sleeping on the floor, and we had no food. And what money Mom did have, she was drinking. And she was a wonderful lady when she was sober. But and I remember this one time, I told my mom, I said, Mom, we don't have any food. And my grandmother was a Christian, and she would teach us scripture verses, and she'd give us these little 50-cent pieces so we could, we were gathering up 50-cent pieces from learning scriptures. And this one time we had no food in our little house, and I remember my mom taking me to the grocery store, and I had bought eggs and bread for my brother and sister so we had food. So those are just some memories I have of that. And she would tell us that he was raping her, but we never saw the abuse, but she was telling us what he was doing to her.
So he had anger issues.
Yeah, they said he was in the war, and that his group, his battalion, I think is what they called it, they had all gotten blown up and died, and he was the one left living. And he was also a police officer. He worked in a prison at nighttime. So yeah, I'm sure he had some things. He obviously had things he was dealing with too.
He had seen a lot of hard things.
Mm-hmm.
There was a lot of hard places where he had been.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so
Mhm.
he had gone through some tremendous things too.
Yeah. Yeah, we think he was on medication.
So there was a struggle.
Yeah.
There was a struggle between the two of them.
Mhm.
And that struggle ended up becoming more heated as time goes on.
Yeah, and she would just keep returning, and I think she returned because we didn't have money, is what I always thought. We kept going back to him. And this one day, we were sitting in a loft. We were watching television. I was about 15, and my brother and sister were probably, I want to say 12, 10, and we're watching television. And he comes up the stairs, just like any other time. They were just arguing. And he says, "I want to talk to you," real mean to my mom. And we were so used to this, Vickie. We would just, "Mom, please work it out with him." It was just like over and over the same thing. They would argue. And we're just, "Please, just stop arguing. Please work it out with him." And so I remember that day she went into the bathroom, and she wasn't in there very long, and she started screaming. Did you want me to touch on that now? Or?
Yes,
Okay.
please.
Okay, so she went in the bathroom, and so we're out there watching TV, and she says, "Call the police, he's got a gun," and she's screaming at the top of her lungs. And we didn't have time. We did not have time to call the police, because back then the phone was downstairs, the phones that have cords on them, and he starts shooting her in the heart. And so I'm 15, and I don't know if it was the traumatic state that I was in, that I went running down the hallway as shots were being fired, and they said there were holes in the door when he was shooting her. He just kept shooting her. And so as I went in a traumatic state, I opened that door, and in the mirror of that bathroom, I watched as my stepfather shot himself in the head. And so when I was pushing open the door, I was literally pushing my mom's body out of the way, and I stepped over her, and it's a memory that doesn't leave. The pain isn't there as much as it was, but I was holding her as she was bleeding, out of her nose and her mouth, and she was choking, and as a 15-year-old, I'm holding my mom who's dying, and my stepfather's laying there, and I'm screaming at my brother and sister not to come in the bathroom. I wouldn't let them see what happened. And we lived in the country, so we had no close neighbors. So that's kind of what happened there.
Did you have one of them call the police?
Well, this is what happened. After I held her for a little bit, as kids, some kids watch a lot of TV, and at the time we did, and we thought, well, I don't know why in my thinking I thought she's just going to come back to life. And so I went downstairs, and my hands, if you've ever had a car accident, you know what it feels to be shaky or in trauma. But if you would multiply that trauma from a car wreck, my hands were shaking so much I couldn't, and back then you pushed on the buttons on the phone, and I couldn't even, I couldn't dial. I didn't even think 911. I couldn't dial anything. And so what had happened was I had not accidentally, but I had hit the 0, and the operator was hearing us kids screaming on the other line, or on the other end. And she said, "Don't hang up the phone." And she's screaming at us, "Don't hang up the phone." And so it was those phones that fall from the wall that have the cord.
Right.
And I remember at that point, us 3 kids were out on the lawn, and this was way out in the country. If you can imagine being out there where there's no neighbors. And we're on the lawn screaming at the top of our lungs, "Somebody please help us, somebody please help us." And my brother, he's the younger one, and he got on his little bicycle. I want to think he was around 9 to 11, somewhere in there. And he got on his little bicycle, and he pedaled as fast as he could go up to the neighbors, which was quite a ways away. So between the phone call and him going up to the neighbors, it seemed like forever, but we finally, sirens came our way, so.
And that's a lot for 3 children to handle.
Yeah. Yeah.
It is more than what any child should ever encounter. Unfortunately, in this world,
Yeah.
in this world,
Yeah.
so many have walked through tragedy,
Mm-hmm.
and hope has been taken from them,
Yeah.
and peace, and everything that they literally say, hey, because as a child, your parents are your hope for your future,
Mm-hmm.
because they provide for you.
Yeah.
They make provision for you.
Yeah.
And, you know, hope deferred can make the heart grow sick.
Mm-hmm.
And when you see all of that taken away from you
Mm-hmm.
and stripped away, it just wounds the heart to such a dimension.
Yeah.
It wounds you so much.
Yeah.
And you're in your soulish realm, your mind, the mind cannot deal with the extreme amount of pain and sorrow and loss,
Mhm.
because it's compounded. Everything's compounded. It's overwhelmed. You'll never see these people ever again. They're all taking from you.
Yeah.
What am I to do next? Where am I to go? And you so many people spiral into a great amount of depression.
If that's not enough, they actually had taken me to the police station because my hand was on the doorknob, and I'm sure they would have taken us to the police station anyway. But and I was questioned even through all of that, and they took us to a house down the road, and nobody was talking. Vickie, I sat in a bathroom in the corner. I couldn't even talk. Like, how do you talk about what just happened? Nobody knew what to say to me, and I didn't know what to say back. And for hours, we sat there, a good 3 hours till my dad could come get us from the other state. And so he drove us back to the other state, and it was the most quiet ride of my whole entire life. Nobody knew what to say.
Well, your dad was even overwhelmed at that point.
Because he still, I mean, at that point, he didn't even want my mom to leave when they had gotten a divorce, I'm sure. So this was just, he had put the custody papers on the altar. He didn't even want us to go live there, and this is what had happened.
Yes.
But we shouldn't be alive, really. Most cases like that, it would have happened in the loft, and all of us would have lost our life. So, later on in my life, as I was praying, I saw a humongous angel standing in that hallway protecting me as those shots were being fired through the door. So,
See?
Yeah.
God
The mercy
always,
of God.
yes.
So that this story can go out and that people's lives will be touched. Thousands upon thousands of people will be delivered and set free from addictions. They'll be set free from depression. They will get out of abusive relationships. They won't be like my mom and keep going back and keep going back. We just declare today that they will be helped in the name of Jesus. That this program today is for them out there watching.
Yes, that they will choose. They will choose.
Yeah, it's a choice.
It's a choice. Everything
Absolutely.
comes down to a choice.
Absolutely.
You have to choose to grab onto hope, to grab onto an abundant life, to have faith that things will get better, to believe that this is only temporal. People all over the world have tremendous, tremendous things that they've walked through. You have, on a journey in life, you can have good and bad, but you take those bad things and you can turn them around for good.
Absolutely.
You can make a testimony when you let the light of Christ come in and shine through you.
Absolutely, that's my heart. I want the world to know that Jesus can set you free, and that is what has happened to me. When I went back home, even though I was walking through all of those things, God's hand was still on my life. Because I remember going back to our little country church with my dad, and now my adopted mom. It was my stepmom at the time. And Jesus was always my run-to. I mean, they would give an altar call, and Loretta's up at the altar every service. I never got counseling for what happened to me, and Jesus was like my best friend. I would sit in my room and just hold onto a pillow saying, Jesus, please hold me. Like, he got me through that season. But a lot of what had happened to me was still buried under a rug. That's what I call it. If you don't get some kind of help, you go back into your life as if it never happened, and you never really dealt with it. It's like I went back into life and I never told anybody what happened. So I had this traumatic thing happen to me, and I could never really talk about it. And yeah.
Yeah, because you have to let it go. You have to speak it out, get it out.
Yeah.
And so many times when you go through something traumatic, when you do get to speak it out, you get to release all of that, you can feel that come off you. And if you keep from not speaking it out, it just smothers you, and you end up with spiraling into depression.
And there was more that had happened to me. You know, all of that happened, and then my sister, she had been, you know, she was another hurting person, and she was doing some drugs, and she was in a car accident and died, and 23 years old. So one of the sisters that was at this house with me when this happened,
What's your sister's name?
Jessica. And so her life will not, like, this is not going to be wasted, Vickie. Everything in me, you know, I'm doing this for my mom, Rosalie. I'm doing this for my sister, Jessica. Like, their lives will not be wasted. But so that had happened. I had another sister who died in her sleep at 27. And I'm just having trauma after trauma. And then my sweet baby gets epileptic seizures. When I think that I cannot handle one more thing on my plate, these things keep happening to me, and I spiraled into a serious depression.